In the era when the judges ruled Israel, a severe famine struck the land of Judah. To escape starvation, Elimelech left the town of Bethlehem, migrating eastward across the Jordan River to live as a foreigner in the country of Moab. But the refuge offered by Moab quickly fractured. Elimelech died, leaving his wife Naomi alone with their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. The sons married local Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. Then, about 10 years later, both sons died as well. This left Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law completely stranded. In this agrarian, patriarchal society, a woman's legal protection, access to land, and basic income were tethered entirely to male relatives. Without husbands or sons to inherit property, these 3 women faced absolute destitution. Naomi decided to make the harsh trek back to Judah. She urged her daughters-in-law to stay behind and seek security in their own mother's houses. Orpah eventually turned back, but Ruth refused. She made a radical vow to abandon her native land and her gods, telling Naomi, "Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people." When the 2 widows finally walked into Bethlehem, the townswomen were shocked. Naomi told them to stop calling her by her given name, which meant pleasant, and instead call her Mara, meaning bitter. She told them, "I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." This state of absolute socioeconomic erasure is the baseline they now had to survive. Look at this photograph of laborers in a field. This is the physical reality of the ancient grain harvest, and it illustrates where Ruth had to turn for their immediate survival. She utilized a localized welfare system known as gleaning. Israelite law dictated that landowners had to leave the edges of their fields unharvested, and any dropped grain was to remain on the ground so the poor and foreign residents could gather it. Ruth went out to glean and happened to end up in a field belonging to a man named Boaz. He was a prominent, wealthy landowner and, crucially, a relative of Naomi's deceased husband, Elimelech. When Boaz noticed Ruth and learned who she was, he went far beyond his strict legal obligation. He told her to stay close to his workers for protection, offered her water from his own vessels, and explicitly ordered his young men to pull extra handfuls of barley out of the bundles and drop them on purpose for her to find. By the end of a single day, this deliberate generosity paid off in volume. Ruth beat out the stalks and collected an entire ephah of barley, roughly 30 pounds of grain. She hauled it back to town, and she and Naomi ate until they were satisfied. But gleaning was seasonal. It solved their immediate need for daily calories, but it offered zero long-term security, and it did nothing to restore their lost family lineage. Knowing the harvest would eventually end, Naomi engineered a much riskier strategy. She instructed Ruth to trigger the cultural obligation of a next of kin, a relative who could marry the widow, buy back the lost family land, and produce an heir to carry on the deceased husband's name. Naomi told Ruth to wash, put on her best clothes, and wait until Boaz had finished eating and drinking at the threshing floor. Once he fell asleep at the end of a heap of grain, Ruth approached stealthily in the dark. She uncovered his feet and lay down. When Boaz startled awake at midnight, he asked who was there. She identified herself and said, "Spread your cloak over your servant, for you are next of kin." By asking him to spread his cloak, Ruth initiated a formal, legally loaded petition for marriage and protection. Boaz praised her loyalty and agreed to help, but he identified a massive legal roadblock. He was indeed a near kinsman, but there was another man living in town who was even more closely related to Elimelech's family. That closer relative held the primary right and obligation to claim the property and the widow. Boaz sent Ruth home before dawn with 6 more measures of barley. Now the permanent survival of both widows hinged entirely on a highly specific legal argument that had to be litigated in public daylight. Boaz immediately went to the city gate, the administrative and judicial center of ancient Bethlehem. He sat down, flagged the closer relative as he walked by, and convened 10 local elders to serve as official witnesses. This diagram outlines the initial transaction. Boaz announced that Naomi was selling the parcel of land that belonged to Elimelech. He offered the closer relative the right of first refusal to redeem it. Seeing a straightforward opportunity to expand his own personal wealth, the relative immediately agreed to buy the field. But then Boaz sprang the trap. He clarified that the day the man acquired the field, he was legally required to also marry Ruth the Moabite as his wife. The goal was to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance. As the flowchart updates here, any child produced would inherit Elimelech's land, stripping that asset straight back out of the relative's own estate. Realizing this would damage his own family's financial standing, the closer relative quickly backed out. He declared he could not redeem the land and officially transferred his right of redemption directly to Boaz. To legally seal this transfer, they engaged in a customary transaction of the time. The relative took off his sandal and handed it to Boaz, right there in front of the elders. Holding the sandal, Boaz called upon the elders and the crowd as witnesses. He officially acquired Elimelech's property and took Ruth as his wife. By expertly navigating ancient property laws, he successfully secured a future for Naomi's lineage. Boaz and Ruth married, and shortly after, Ruth conceives and gives birth to a son. The women of Bethlehem gathered around Naomi, reversing the bitter declaration she had made years earlier. They praised the fact that she had not been left without a kinsman, and told her that Ruth, her loyal foreign daughter-in-law, had proven to be worth more to her than 7 sons. Naomi took the child and became his nurse. This family tree tracks what happened next. The neighborhood women named the boy Obed. He grew up and eventually became the father of a man named Jesse, and Jesse became the father of David. A severe famine, a devastating string of deaths, and absolute poverty had threatened to erase this family completely. But through the rigorous application of local welfare customs and kinship laws, a destitute foreign widow and a local farmer secured a legacy that eventually placed King David on the throne of Israel.